A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps, because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships. We have shifted now. We've just completed over a year of looking at the 12 steps and how they help us develop an authentic self-esteem and how that self-esteem is related to our emotional sobriety. And at the end of that, we're talking about what we do next. And my dear friend Roger said, well, Al, look, you've got the 12 essential insights. So now let's dig into the 12 essential insights. And so last week, I started my presentation on the first insight, which is chapter 3 in the book, which is the 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety, waking up from our sleepwalking. That video is on the YouTube channel. So please, if you haven't watched that, go ahead and take a look at it so that you can stay with us in terms of our development and progression as we discuss this. And Roger volunteered last week to be next up in line to take a bite out of this chapter and see where we go. So Raj, how are you this evening, first of all?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling quite good. It was a really nice day here in LA, and I'm looking out at a lot of nice green leaves from trees around me right now. So and I'm really looking forward to sharing some thoughts.
Well, listen, I got to say too, I got to spend most of Sunday with you this last week, and it was just wonderful, man. It really did my heart well and my soul well, and it was so good to be with you, man.
Same for me, as you could tell, I'm sure. Al, same for me. Well, all right. First of all, I was very inspired by what you shared last week, Al, and I said that to you, and how you worded your writing in this book and in this chapter particularly, and how you talked about this chapter last week. So I have a lot to say tonight. So I would appreciate it, Tom or Susie or whoever is going to be doing the bell during time for sharing from our participants. Please, at 7:30, I probably will still be going on because I've got a lot I want to talk about tonight. Please sound that and help me be aware of the time so I can finish up at that point. I'd appreciate it. All right. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, or you know the deal, depending on what part of the world you're in. I want to begin with a few general comments about emotional sobriety tonight before I get into what excellent sleepwalkers most of us are in our lives and how we can help wake ourselves up. Making progress toward improved emotional sobriety, in my view, is both one of the most difficult and one of the most rewarding practices that we can undertake in our lives. The first thing I needed to understand about emotional sobriety is that it's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that lasts a lifetime. And it's important to let that sink in, at least for me, because it helps me have more patience with myself and fewer unrealistic expectations if I keep that in focus. Another way to say that is that it's a process. It's not an event. So what is so challenging about improving our emotional sobriety? Well, consider this. All that each one of us has to do in order to become more emotionally sober is choose to become more aware of often very painful realities about ourselves, about other people, about life itself, realities that the defenses we have so creatively and carefully crafted within us have spent a lifetime suppressing, ignoring, and being oblivious to. Don't like those painful realities. All we need to do to develop emotional sobriety is to accept both outer and inner realities that we find utterly unacceptable. All we need to do is we need to learn to tolerate painful and frightening feelings that we find deeply intolerable, and to consistently take actions that scare the crap out of us, even if we're just contemplating them. Right? That's all we need to do. But the good news is the journey toward emotional sobriety is a journey we are all capable of taking, each one of us, little by little, step by step, situation by situation, minute by minute, with countless mistakes and one step forward, two steps back. If we're lucky, two steps forward, one step back. All of that as part of this process, right? And with each bit of progress, we feel better. We feel like we can grow in our self-acceptance and self-respect. It helps our relationships, our work, and every aspect of our functioning as we grow in emotional sobriety. Every bit of progress helps us realize that we can learn, we can grow, we can create better lives for ourselves and for other people, little by little, bit by bit. And I emphasize that so much because I've been reading a lot of work by a famous and very effective psychotherapist who found that for many of us, breaking our goals down into smaller and smaller chunks, smaller and smaller pieces, was the key to helping us be able to move forward and make progress in our lives. How do we grow in emotional sobriety? I'll say a little bit more about this at the end of my talk, but we do it by expanding our consciousness first and foremost, by accepting more and more of reality as it is, and by taking helpful rather than self-defeating actions. We do this by practicing the principles, attitudes, and behaviors you have heard us discussing for the past years in these emotional sobriety workshops. Alan's book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, which is now our focus, is a great resource for all of these practices. I want to highlight a couple of points that Alan made last week because they are so important to understand. Those of you who were here got to see some delightful and very illuminating videos of Piaget's experiments regarding cognitive development in young children. We saw how at certain ages, children are unable to solve some problems correctly because their brains and therefore their cognitive abilities just are not sufficiently developed to do so, to solve the problems. And Alan drew a parallel between the inability of those kids to do anything other than pay attention to just one dimension of what they were looking at, right? One aspect only of it, but not be able to really incorporate changes into their thinking, into their processing. And he drew a parallel between that and what we do as adults, that we do exactly the same thing, not because of insufficient cognitive development, but because of our insufficient, inadequate differentiation. Now, what does that mean? Well, remember, differentiation is a process that happens over many, many years of our lives, but especially in childhood and adolescence. It's a process of the gradual development of our sense of identity, of our sense of self, of who we are. The gradual development of our autonomy and our ability to provide increased support for ourselves in our lives while remaining connected to other people in meaningful ways. When our level of differentiation is low, emotional maturity is low as well. And we are limited to focusing only on one dimension of problems we face in life. And as Alan put it, that dimension that we are limited to in life is all about us. We are profoundly self-centered in our viewpoint toward life, toward other people, when our level of autonomy, our level of our sense of self and identity is poorly developed. I realize this may seem paradoxical to say that the more differentiated we become, the stronger my sense of identity and my clarity about who I am and who I'm not is, the less self-centered I tend to become in my life. But that's exactly how differentiation works. Because as I become more differentiated, I become more secure within myself. And I don't need to do all the acting out in terms of grandiosity and arrogance and being unkind or uncaring to other people that I may feel I need to do out of anxiety if I'm not as well differentiated, not as secure. And none of us are always completely secure in our sense of identity and our sense of ourself. And none of us are always at a total loss regarding our sense of self. But over time, we do tend to develop an increased sense of differentiation if we are focused on that goal and devote our consciousness to it. So the more secure I become within myself, as Brandon and others have pointed out, the less I am toward arrogance, grandiosity, and other failings and limitations. But to the extent we've not yet been able to differentiate well, we see other people in terms of what they can do for us, how they can meet our needs, or how they might present possible harm to us. And we end up taking everything personally: life, events, situations, and the behavior, especially of other people. Those are some of the points Alan made, and I think made really well in his talk last week. When we are poorly differentiated, we have a distorted and elevated sense of self-importance. We also call that grandiosity, right? We're unable to see problems objectively, and we're unable to see situations from another person's point of view, let alone accept life on life's terms. So now I'd like to talk more about the subject matter of the first of the 12 essentials, the 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety that Alan talked about, waking up from our sleepwalking. Nathaniel Branden, who you've heard us talk about much for the past year in his books on self-esteem, wrote, "The first step toward change is awareness. The second step is acceptance." What he meant by that is I can become aware of an issue or a problem, and I can immediately, at a conscious level, or much more often at a subconscious level, if it makes me anxious or uncomfortable or hurt, I can push it away, right? I can begin to sleepwalk regarding that feeling or that issue or whatever it is that's arising in me. So that's why he says the second step of change is acceptance after awareness. To one degree or another, we are all in this position of being asleep, believing that we're awake. I have an experiment that I'd like each of you listening to try for a few minutes to hopefully expand your awareness and acceptance. I want you to take a moment, everyone, to imagine that you can look back in time and see yourself in your mind's eye at a younger age. If you're in your 70s, like me, you might think back to when you were in your 50s or in your 30s. If you're in your 20s, you might think back to your teenage years or your childhood. Here's the question I want you to reflect on for a minute. What can you see from your present perspective as we sit here for this workshop about the ways that you were asleep, but probably believed you were awake at the age that you're visualizing in your mind? What problems or limitations or imperfections can you now see from this vantage point that you had at that time, but you had little or no awareness of whatsoever at that point in your life? So take a moment to think about that. What can you see in terms of growth in your awareness and your learning since that time? What can you see you were unaware of about yourself, about life, about other people? What can you see you were oblivious to? Sleepwalking regarding. For me, the longer I reflect on that, the more I see. But just think of one or two things if they come to you. Now, identify at least one belief or attitude or rule, as Alan mentioned a moment ago, or limitation that has changed in the intervening years for you, whether or not you set about to consciously and intentionally change it. One of your limitations, one of your blind spots, if you will, that you have a lot more awareness around, or a behavior that you're a lot more able to engage in now with some degree of comfort than you were that long ago. So think about at least one way in which you've changed from that younger version of yourself. And finally, notice how you feel toward that younger version of yourself. Do you feel affectionate and accepting? Do you feel hostile or even hateful? Critical, compassionate, judgmental, embarrassed? Depending on the moments I visualize, I have all those experiences, right? Toward myself at different ages and at different moments. And remember here, the goal is to be aware and accepting of what is true, not what you might wish were true. So I want to say that again. When you think about how you feel toward that version of yourself that was younger, just be aware of what's true. And as best you can, how able you are to accept what's true. Okay, now let's take it one step further. Now imagine yourself 5, 10, or 20 years or more, if you're young, into the future. And you're looking back from your future vantage point at your present self, at who you are at this workshop right now. In your imagination, in what ways do you imagine from that future self's viewpoint are you sleepwalking right now at your present age, at this moment? How are you sleepwalking, avoiding, denying, distracting, minimizing today? What issues and feelings and conflicts within yourself or with others are you turning away from? Do you find it difficult or scary or painful to look at? Because consciousness exists on a continuum. Often we have glimpses of things and we have some awareness, and then, like I said a few moments ago, we push it away, we shove it away. Or sometimes we have no awareness of our blind spots are truly blind spots. We have no awareness of them at all. Other times we have a high degree of awareness, but not as fully as it will become with time. So that was my last question. Now, you might object. Look, Roger, if I'm truly sleepwalking in some ways today, then by definition, I can't tell you how I'm sleepwalking today because I don't know what I don't know and I can't see what I can't see, right? What we keep saying in these talks that we give. And there's a lot of truth to that. I would agree with you. But try this. In your mind, create a few brief endings to the following sentence stems. A sentence stem is the first few words of a sentence that you make up an ending to, a brief ending. The endings you make up don't need to be true, don't need to make any sense. Just let whatever comes to mind come through in your mind with no censoring whatsoever. The first sentence I want you to explore 3 or 4 different endings to, where you repeat the root each time and then add a different ending. I'm sleepwalking in my life today when just notice what comes to mind. I'm sleepwalking in my life today when for me, what comes up right away is I'm thinking about my efforts to lose some weight and then I go eat some chocolate right away, right? Just a simple example. These endings don't have to be profound. I'm sleepwalking in my life today when or a second variation, something I avoid looking at in my life today is. It can be an issue, a feeling, a relationship. Something I avoid looking at in my life today is. Let 2 or 3 endings come up. They may surprise you. The goal sometimes is to have them surprise you, if you can let them be truly spontaneous in your mind. Nathaniel Branden was a master at helping us come out of our psychological slumber and begin to wake up using these incomplete sentences, they're called. Using them, we can very quickly move from little or no conscious awareness to significant and helpful awareness. Nathaniel related the story once that a child asked him what he did with his clients. And after reflecting on it for a few moments and considering he was speaking to a child, he said, I help people realize that they know a lot more than they think they do. And I always love that.
Roger, it's 10:30, Roger.
Thank you. I help people realize that they know a lot more than they think they do, that we know a lot more than we think we do. To an adult, he might have said that he helps people understand that we know far more than we are consciously aware of about our motivations and intentions, our emotions, and about possible solutions to our problems. That our unconscious or subconscious, I use them interchangeably, has much of value to offer us if we can simply learn to listen. Alan uses these incomplete sentences at the end of each chapter in this book. So I will work in other material that I wanted to share tonight about if being conscious is so important, why the heck do we begin to sleepwalk in our lives? Because it is critical to our functioning. But the reasons that we begin to sleepwalk are deep and very valid at the time we use them. It revolves around our need to protect ourselves from emotions that feel overwhelming and threatening to us and become unbearable and intolerable, that we need to shut down, that we need to distance ourselves from. And then as we get older and hopefully begin to feel somewhat safer, we can begin to unpack some of what we buried within us. A couple of comments about how we do that. We do that by bringing more consciousness to our pain, to our fears, to our anger, more consciousness to those places that we do not want to go. It's hard to do. It's a struggle. It's a battle and takes a lot of courage. And we can't do some things at a certain point in time. They're just too much for us, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. But that's the direction. So I will, as I say, share some other material that I had, but thank you all very much for listening. And thank you, Alan, for the chance to share those thoughts tonight.
You want to go ahead and kick this off? Boy, Roger said a lot, man.
Sure, yeah, an awful lot. A very, very panoramic view and context for our discussion. We could unpack that for a long time. Staying connected to the topic of waking up, I can relate it to my own personal experience, in that when I went to the hospital to support Mary's recovery, they asked me two things. One, stop drinking for 90 days so that you support her sobriety journey. At that point, I wasn't aware that I had a problem. I'm not sure they were, and it doesn't actually matter. But I was willing to do that. Then they asked me to ask myself a question. And as simple as this sounds, it changed my life. That I was willing to hear the question and willing to take the action that they were suggesting. And that was to do an autobiography of my history with alcohol. And I will broaden that to honor what we're talking about here. Is the technique would be to do a autobiography specifically, not general, not your story, not all of the drama, no, but focused on your history with that particular point of suffering. Whatever that suffering is, it's your current suffering, your current source as you perceive it today of suffering. I'm broadening it, making it perhaps applicable to more people than just an alcohol or addiction problem. But then in 1984, I began to write out in bullet point, not drama, not catharsis, not psychology, not therapy, just bullet point, just the facts. Began drinking at age 12. And then I went on through, as I was thinking about it over several sit downs to complete it, taking the time to do it thoughtfully and completely, I became aware of a pattern that I had never seen. I'm 43 years old at that time. I was fairly well educated in a self-reflective background. And I was seeing a pattern of connection to alcohol, to my drama and suffering in my life. And then the key was, the next instruction was, now read that writing out to a small group of people. And I was willing to do that for whatever reason. And as I was reading it out, hearing it out loud for the very first time, I had an experience of connecting the dots, not just an intellectual, oh, look at the pattern, but the experience of, oh my God, I have a problem with alcohol. I was not shocked at having the problem. I was totally shocked that I had never seen it. 20 years of drinking, very visible evidence. I'm talking about a couple jails, a couple hospitalizations, trouble at work, et cetera, et cetera. Very visible, expensive, dramatic. And I had never, over a 20-year period, I had never seen any kind. So that was my wake-up moment. And as I look back on it 40 years later, I can see that it was a moment, but then that process continued with the same dynamic. When I met somebody who I trusted, and they asked me a question that I would then willingly answer and write it out and then share it with somebody. Again, I would have this information that I would get for the first time, seeing it even after that moment in 1984, in 1988, beginning to see through the step process that I'm not a victim. I'm 4 years sober. I'm in therapy. I'm doing all kinds of wonderful things. And in 1988, I go through this step work and I get some questions and I take some action and I begin to share it with this man who was sick. And I have a whole new experience of, oh, I'm not a victim. I may have been victimized, but today at age 48, 4 years sober, I'm not a victim. I'm a perpetrator, completely the opposite. And again, I was shocked, I was actually shocked at the awareness of that, but I was more shocked that I had, in those 4 years, talking to a sponsor every day, going to a therapist regularly, that I had never really connected it. And I could go on like that, increments of 5, 10 years, maybe yearly, maybe daily, as you indicated, Roger, and be conscious and be curious, as Dr. Berger would say, and be willing. And I say this all the time to the people in my workshop, be willing to be surprised. Have an open mind and an open heart. And you've seen me do this before. The man who took me through the steps that very first time, 4 years sober, said, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. And from then on, I was able to take some information, filter it through my heart, through my action, through my experience, through communication and interaction with other people, and to begin to really become more and more and more progressively conscious. Today, the metaphor I use is the dimmer switch. That the lights were pressed on at a very gentle, low voltage level in 1988, at 43 years old. And ever since, because I stayed gently pressed up against that dimmer switch, the light keeps getting brighter. And I keep seeing more. The good news, I keep seeing more. The bad news, I keep seeing more. I think it was Thibault who said the ego, Bill Wilson was right. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth, but the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. And that's what Alan and you were both talking about in terms of the disturbed and the emotional sobriety, is being aware of these emotions that are the signals to us that something's amiss. And with our consciousness, we can course correct, and we continue to be conscious and course correct. The biggest change, and your questions were wonderful in terms of moments, and the biggest change in me is I'm less, I wanted to say I'm undefended, but I'm less I'm less defended today than I've ever been in my entire life, because I'm not afraid to make a mistake, because I'm very confident that I'm not a mistake. So thanks.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
That says so much, just the way you said that, or right on. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you what stands out to me from this discussion tonight. First of all, outstanding job, Raj. And I'm sitting here and it's going, man, you make me sound intelligent.
And hey,
I don't know if you have this experience, but when you hear somebody play back stuff you've done, it's like, God, did I do that? Was that really me?
I only got to page 5.5 of my 12-page presentation. So if you want to feel even more intelligent, I can continue.
Well, why don't you continue next time? Would be fine, because Tom, I don't think will be here. So we'll continue on, because you're going to hit a topic too that I want to get into when I come back and share again about this chapter, because it is the foundation for what we need to do with emotional sobriety and to change our consciousness. Right. And I just want to mention that. See, what stood out to me from both what you said and what Herb just said is I cannot do this by myself.
I couldn't.
Yeah. No, see, it's and please hear that. I mean, Bill talked about if self-reflection, when it's just with you and yourself, becomes a soliloquy, and it's not going to go anywhere. And what Herb is talking about, what Roger is talking about in terms of Nathaniel Brandon, my experience with Tom McCall, with you, Roger, is my friend, with you, Herb, is my friend. You guys stimulate me to look at things in a different way than I can look at them. And then my consciousness starts to expand, because bring you in, and I allow you to influence me. And this becomes an important part of the process, is the ability to be vulnerable enough to be influenced. And to not feel like you're losing yourself through that influence.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a different consciousness for me as before. It's like I had to be invulnerable and not let you in. When I open myself up to that possibility, right, of being influenced by others, I have a chance to see things that I couldn't see.
That's right.
See things that I even hear things that I couldn't hear. And even consider things that I could not even consider as possibilities in terms of my own experience and the possibility of a new experience in my life. So please hear that we need each other in this process to be that alarm clock, to say, Herb, wake up. Roger, wake up. Alan, wake up. It's time. There's more possibilities here than you've ever realized. And that's, like you said, Herb, it's the good news and it's the bad news. You know, this stuff is just, you see it, and I see things about myself and I hate it and I love it.
Yeah.
I hate it that, oh my God, I'm not who I thought I was. And I love it as my God. I can see that I can become who I am by owning, like you said, Roger, this self-acceptance and starting to embrace ourselves. So that's the part that I want to contribute tonight, right? Is that we need each other in this process. And that means that you've got to find someone, and I've talked about this before when we went through the steps, that can be your enlightened witness. They are an enlightened witness to your life. They will come into your life and they will help you see things you can't see. I love Herb's analogy of the lantern. Whenever I see you, Herb, I think of you carrying a lantern around now. You've changed my idea of you forever. He's the lantern man. He's the guy walking down the dark street and bringing the lantern so other people can find their way. And that's what we do with each other. And that's the exciting part of this program, right? Is we're a community, and we've been building that on Thursday nights. And I'm so appreciative of the 150 people of you that are here and are sharing this and are going to go out and share this with other people, you know, because that's what we do. And what was that one line you had, Herb, about, I forgot, it was the saint that said it or something like that. Everywhere we go, we preach the gospel. And sometimes we use words. Sometimes we
and
use
gospel translates into good news.
That's it. That's what's happening here, you guys. So thanks again, Roger, and we'll continue on with your rest of your notes for next week.
Sounds great.
I would add one thing, Alan, and you said it, but I want to make it really clear to the people who are listening about the help that we need. Yes, we need it from an accountability partner or a mentor or a teacher. Yes, but you also mentioned we need the community.
Yes, that's right.
It's both an individual as well as the community that supports us. Whatever the community is, and you reference this group, this has become a fingerprint community of its own destiny. That's right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I had some other things to say about the importance of other people in this whole process as well that I'll share next week. So Al, it means so much to me, man. I'm picturing you looking at a version of yourself 30 or 40 years ago, and just how much you've moved, man, toward that willingness to let other people in and to be vulnerable. It's unbelievable. It's amazing. So I thank you. Those words are so heartening to me.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn, is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.